Hello, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. Tonight we're venturing into a rather peculiar what-if, a universe where gravity, the quiet force holding everything in place, suddenly decides to let go. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Whether you're curled up in bed, sitting by a quiet window, or drifting off somewhere halfway across the globe, it's always fascinating to imagine this little community of curious minds scattered all over our spinning planet. If you enjoy these calm, late-night explorations, please do consider giving the video a like and subscribing. It really helps me keep making these journeys for you. And to those of you already subscribed, thank you for being part of this little pocket of peace in the noisy universe. Now, I'll do my best to make this relaxing, but I should offer a small warning. I hope the video isn't so interesting that it keeps you awake, but if it does, at least you'll drift off having learned something new, which is not a bad way to lose a little sleep. So what would really happen if one of the most important forces in the universe simply stopped? Gravity. It's everywhere, always working, always pulling. It's the invisible hand that holds oceans to the earth, keeps the moon in its place, and binds the planets to the sun. It's so constant, so dependable, that we hardly notice it at all, until in this thought experiment it disappears. In the next little while, we're going to take a calm, measured walk through that impossible scenario, starting with the smallest changes, your teacup floating gently off the table, and ending with the most unimaginable consequences, stretching across billions of years and uncountable galaxies. We'll look at the physics, the beauty, and the strange poetry of a universe without gravity, moving step by step from the familiar to the farthest reaches of space. We'll explore what happens in your home, your street, the oceans, the atmosphere, the moon, the sun, and even to the very shape of the universe itself. Along the way, there will be moments of gentle humour, points of reflection, and plenty of space to just picture it. So, take a breath, get comfortable, and let's imagine what happens when the force that holds everything together lets go. You're sitting with a warm cup of tea, a book open on your lap, and the soft hush of evening pooled around the room. The steam has that slow, curling grace that always looks a little like it is practicing ballet. Then, without ceremony or sound, the familiar tug beneath everything loosens. It is not a jolt. It is not a jump. It is more like a secret being let out of the world. Your body becomes light, not because you are less, but because the downward pull that gave you weight has slipped away. The first sensation is surprisingly gentle. Your chair had been quietly squashed under you, springs and foam holding a small grudge. When the grudge dissolves, the cushion exhales and gives you the softest nudge upward. You're no longer held in place by the Earth's pull, so even that tiny push has consequences. You drift a few centimetres, then a few more, like a leaf that forgot how to land. There is no lurch in your stomach, none of the roller coaster flutter you get in an elevator. That feeling in elevators comes from changes in acceleration. Here, the acceleration is gone. You are simply coasting. Across the room, the book you left face down decides it has had enough of the table. It lifts a little as the table decompresses, turns lazily, and begins a slow, dignified procession into the quiet air. Not everything moves at once. Things that were not compressed, that have no little spring stored inside them, hesitate. A pen sits where it is until a draft from the heating vent, still pushing because the fan has momentum, ruffles it into motion. A paperclip shifts as the surface it rests on flexes and rebounds. Tiny causes, big effects, the motto of a world without weight. Your tea becomes a marvel. Without gravity to tug it into a flat surface, surface tension takes the lead. The liquid draws itself into a plush, rounded shape that bulges above the rim, a shimmering glass bead with steam stitched to its surface. A few droplets that once were falling from the cup's edge forget how to fall, and instead collect themselves into small, perfect spheres that idle near your hand. You move a finger, and one of those spheres latches on, wobbling like a transparent jelly. It feels cool at first, then warm. Heat still travels through it, even if the rules of up and down have taken the night off. Listen closely. The room sounds different when nothing has weight. Footsteps do not thud. Chairs do not scrape. The floorboards, freed from a day of holding everyone up, stop creaking. There is a new sort of hush, the kind that makes you aware of small things. The murmur of air through a vent, the whir of a fan winding down, the quiet sibilance of your own breath. The air itself slows because most of the swirls and eddies that fill a room are driven by warm air rising and cool air sinking. Without gravity, warm and cool do not know which way is which. Convection pauses and the atmosphere rests. You try to stand, and the word stand suddenly feels old-fashioned. You place your hands against the arms of the chair and push, expecting the usual resistance. Instead, you push yourself and the chair apart. The chair glides one way, you glide the other, both of you obeying the same polite rule the universe has always followed. If nothing is pushing or pulling, a thing will keep doing what it is already doing. This is inertia, the simplest and most stubborn idea in physics. You're a spaceship now, and your smallest actions are thruster firings. Press a fingertip against the wall, and you sail away with a kind of grace you never quite managed in gym class. The difference between mass and weight declares itself in the most practical way. You have the same mass you had a moment ago, which means you have the same resistance to being sped up or slowed down. You're not flimsy, you're simply unpinned. Try to stop yourself by grabbing a floating cushion, and you will keep moving together, a duet across the lounge. Tug the curtain cord and both you and the cord drift in a patient negotiation, neither one particularly eager to stop. Weight depended on gravity. Mass is yours no matter what the universe is doing. Shelves sigh. The wood that had been bearing the load relaxes, pushing books into motion as it returns to its unburdened shape. A slim paperback slips free, turns like a slow leaf in autumn, and bumps into another book. They couple gently and float as one. Nothing smashes to the ceiling. There is no up to smash into. There is only the direction things happen to be pushed when their supports let go. Air drag still exists, so nothing sprints away. The room has become an aquarium, and every object is a calm fish. Your body is quietly confused in ways you only notice after a minute or two. Inside your inner ears are tiny stones called otoliths that usually tell you which way down is. They are no longer pulled in any direction, so the signal gets fuzzy. Your sense of balance relies on teamwork between eyes, inner ears, and the gentle pull under your feet. With the team's shorter player, you feel a drifting lightness in your head, a momentary uncertainty that resolves when your eyes decide to be in charge. You adjust like a natural, because humans are surprisingly good at adjusting when things change slowly and kindly. Look at the curtains. Before, warm air from the radiator would lift, cool and sink, waving the fabric without asking your permission. Now, those currents fade. The curtains rest. Dust motes, once engaged in endless slow-motion acrobatics, hang in place until they are nudged by your passing. A hand wave creates a breeze that never quite falls away, because there is no weight to make air sink. It spreads, thins, and becomes the new stillness. On the table, a pencil begins its pilgrimage. It had been trapped in a shallow groove in the wood, the tiniest valley carved by years of writing. As the tabletop relaxes, the valley softens and the pencil is gently eased out. It slides, slowly rotates, and, with the lightest tap, kisses the rim of the teacup before moving on, following a line only it understands. You reach to catch it, and your reach sends you drifting backward. Catching things here is a conversation, not a grab. You give a little push with your toe against the skirting board and come to a stop, learning by feel what the equations would have told you all along. You try a small experiment because curiosity loves an empty stage. You set two objects floating side by side, a heavy hardback and a crumpled tissue. With gravity gone, neither one falls faster. The only difference now is how the air treats them. The tissue meets a lot of air and slows quickly. The hardback, more streamlined and with more inertia, keeps going a little further before the air hushes it into stillness. In the old world, you would say the heavy thing falls faster. That was a myth built from seeing air drag and gravity tangle together. Untangle them, and the rules become elegant. Another experiment. You gently pour a little tea into the air. It does not pour. It collects as a round drop that trembles and slowly drifts. You bring the cup close and the drop touches the rim, stretching like syrup, then deciding the cup is the place to be. Surface tension is the tea's best friend now, an elastic skin that keeps it together. Without buoyancy, which depended on gravity, there is no reason for light things to float or heavy things to sink. There is only cohesion, adhesion, and the pushes you give. A picture frame on the wall creaks and shifts. It had been hung on a nail that relied on the downward pull to stay meaningful. Now the gentle flex of the wall and the tiny tension of the hanging wire suggest a new path, and the frame eases outward, rotating like a door that forgot where the floor is. You slow it with a fingertip and it cooperates, grateful for the attention. Even the nail, freed from the load, inches out a fraction as the wallboard uncompresses, then stops, content to wait for whatever happens next. You feel the truth of inertia most clearly when you try to stop yourself right in front of the bookshelf. In the old world, planting your feet and leaning would do the trick. Here, there are no planted feet. You reach, touch the shelf, and your touch becomes a negotiation. You push a little, the shelf pushes you back exactly as much, and both you and the shelf begin to drift in opposite directions, slower and slower as the air rubs the sharp edges off your motion. Every action still has an equal and opposite reaction. You're just more aware of it when the ground is not quietly doing the bookkeeping. It is tempting to think of this as chaos, but it is not. It is a different kind of order. Every movement has a story. A compressed spring releasing, a fan winding down, a hand brushing past, a breath exhaled. Without gravity, things do not know how to fall, but they still know how to continue. Motion persists until something nudges it. Rest persists until something jostles it. The rules have always said that. We are finally paying attention. You turn your head and watch the room as if it were a slow-moving mobile in a child's nursery. The clock hand still sweeps because inside the clock, small forces still push gears along their teeth. A scarf loops in the air like a sleepy comet. Your own hair, freed from any allegiance to down, fans around your face in a halo you could never style on purpose. It is beautiful and a little funny, and it makes more sense the longer you live inside it. You place your palms together and press. Your body answers with the gentlest recoil, and you float toward the window at a pace that would not scare a moth. Outside, leaves detached from branches linger at different heights, each telling a story about how it was released. Some cling with tiny bits of resin and do not move at all. Others drift like paper boats on a pond. A bird that had been perched now hovers exactly where it took off, wings sweeping air that no longer gives it lift in the old way. It becomes a master of momentum instead, pushing against the air to redirect itself, inventing a new choreography in an instant. Everything feels lighter because weight is gone, but nothing is trivial. The invisible scaffolding that held daily life together has faded, and in its place the simpler scaffolding of motion remains. You're buoyed not by water or air, but by the absence of being pinned. The room teaches this lesson with kindness. Every drift, every glide, every object discovering its own preferred path is a small demonstration of how the universe behaves when one of its great tugs is set to zero. You take a breath, steady and unhurried, and let yourself float. The cup, the book, the dust, the pencil, the curtain, your own heartbeat. All of it is obeying the same unadorned principles. Without the pull that once pressed everything against everything else, the tiniest pushes now matter. A whisper of air from your lips sends a droplet spinning. a toe against a wall redraws your course. Inertia is not an abstract idea here. It is the gentle language of a room that has forgotten how to fall and remembered how to coast. Across town, the first minutes without gravity play out like a quietly absurd dream. Inside a cafe, a spoon left in a mug begins to wander away, taking the long route to nowhere in particular. A customer reaches for it, only to find themselves drifting sideways into the next table. The startled laugh they give off is met with the same bemused expression on every other face in the room, a mixture of what just happened and this is probably fine. Chairs slowly lift a few centimetres from the floor, releasing the muffled sigh of their upholstery. The clink of cups is replaced by a soft shuffling of objects gliding through the still air. In a living room somewhere, a child squeals in delight as their toys gently float upwards, not shooting into the sky but rising with the grace of bubbles in thick syrup. A cat, less impressed, makes a slow-motion leap toward the couch and misses entirely, its paws paddling at empty space. It drifts past the coffee table, eyes wide, tail flicking in puzzlement. The scene is quiet enough that you can hear the small rustle of its fur brushing against a lampshade. Outdoors, things feel stranger. People on park benches find themselves being nudged gently upward, the wood beneath them rebounding like a mattress finally freed from decades of use. A man walking his dog is momentarily confused when the leash, no longer weighted down, coils lazily above his head. The dog itself finds that its usual bounce has turned into a slow, unguided float. Grass blades no longer bow under footsteps. They simply sway in the faint movements of the air. Balloons, once tugged impatiently by children, now drift without any sense of direction, their strings coiling in random patterns. The confusion is punctuated by moments of genuine wonder. A woman in a train station releases her bag to adjust her scarf, expecting the thud of it on the ground. Instead, it hovers in front of her like a polite companion waiting for permission to follow. Commuters, already experts in ignoring one another, cannot help but look around now, eyes flicking between the floating bags, the slowly spinning hats, the coins slipping from pockets and hanging in mid-air. On the platform, a vending machine's display of crisps and chocolate bars begins to sag forward, the products no longer held tightly in their spirals. On a moving train, the scene takes on a peculiar calm. Without gravity, the train's wheels no longer grip the rails in the usual way, but momentum keeps it moving in a straight line, suspended ever so slightly above the track. Passengers notice that their drinks no longer stay neatly in cups. They form trembling domes above the rims. Newspapers and jackets drift away from laps. One man in the corner blinks several times, then begins poking the air with his finger, chasing a pen that refuses to stay put. The chatter is subdued, not frightened, just uncertain. Meanwhile, high above the ground, people in planes are already used to the idea of being aloft, but now the cabin feels oddly different. The usual pull of the seatbelt is gone. Small items that would have rolled into the aisle are now in lazy orbits around the passengers. Flight attendants glance at one another with the shared look of people who have seen turbulence, weather delays, and even the occasional bird strike. But nothing like this. The plane keeps moving forward, but without the gentle tug of gravity, everything inside behaves like it's in space. Even the coffee, poured with professional confidence, collects in mid-air like a slow golden bead before being caught in a cup. In supermarkets, the effect turns aisles into curious playgrounds. Shopping trolleys, no longer pinned to the floor, glide gently along the same path they were pushed, sometimes bumping into displays or slowly overtaking distracted shoppers. A loaf of bread escapes its shelf entirely and drifts past the frozen food section, gaining a small crowd of onlookers. The tin of beans that once sat on the edge of a display finally tips over, not to crash onto the tiles, but to begin a gentle, wobbling journey into the bakery section. The overhead lights gleam off jars of jam now spinning softly in the air. It is part absurd theatre, part physics lesson, all unfolding in slow motion. Curiosity begins to rise just as much as the objects themselves. People find themselves experimenting instinctively. They release their phones and watch them hover. They push themselves off walls to move without walking. Some laugh, some frown in concentration, some just stare. It is difficult to be alarmed when everything is happening so slowly, so gracefully, without the violence of a fall. Children adapt instantly, treating the world as though it has always been like this. Adults, having decades of down drilled into them, take a little longer to adjust. And through it all, one idea quietly makes itself known. We never really thought about gravity until it vanished. It has always been the silent background of existence, an unseen contract between you and the ground. You never had to tell your coffee to stay in the cup, or your keys to wait obediently in your pocket. You never considered the fact that every single step you took was a small wrestle between your muscles and a planet's pull. We have lived with gravity for so long that we stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator until it switches off, and the silence feels oddly loud. This sudden absence does not just strip away weight, it strips away an assumption so deep it feels like part of reality itself. In its place is something new. A calm, drifting stage where motion no longer ends simply because it should, where objects do not know where to settle, and where every movement you make writes a fresh, slow equation into the air. In those first minutes, confusion softens into fascination, and fascination begins to open the door to questions. Questions no one ever thought to ask when gravity was still the most dependable thing in the universe. The first place you really notice the change is at home, because here you know how everything is meant to behave. A packet of biscuits that had been resting on the counter begins to slide away. Not downwards, but out into the air, as though it has decided to see more of the kitchen. On the bookshelf, novels lift from their neat rows, breaking rank one by one, covers rotating like they are showing themselves off. A potted plant, leaves spread like sails, hovers just above its usual spot, bits of dry soil escaping and drifting like tiny brown satellites. The air feels different now, not because it is lighter, but because the usual warm air rising and cool air sinking has stopped. Dust motes are no longer caught in invisible currents. They hang still until a passing elbow or a lazy breath sets them adrift. Objects seem oddly patient. A cushion you nudge with your foot keeps going at the same unhurried pace until it meets a wall. In a world without gravity, motion only changes when something pushes or pulls, an idea that has been true forever, but rarely so easy to see in action. Your pet quickly becomes the star of this new environment. A dog, confused but determined, kicks its legs as if swimming, discovering that the effort only works if there is something solid to push against. A cat, normally graceful, turns clumsy in slow motion, trying to twist mid-air to land on feet it no longer needs. Both creatures wear the same puzzled expression, the one that says they have temporarily lost their place in the rulebook. In a way, they are conducting their own experiments, learning how to steer in an environment that offers no natural down to aim for. Everyday habits begin to rewrite themselves. You go to open a cupboard, and the act pushes you backward while the door swings forward, each of you drifting away from the other, like polite strangers parting in a narrow street. Setting down a mug is no longer a matter of placing it on a surface. Without a push in the opposite direction, you simply send it floating away. To stop yourself, you reach for the nearest solid object and find yourself moving it instead. Because in zero gravity, the force you apply works both ways. Push on a table, and you glide one way while the table glides the other. Even small actions become deliberate negotiations between you and the objects around you. This is something astronauts know well. In orbit, they rely on handholds, footholds, and carefully placed straps to stay put while they work. The International Space Station is full of them. Velcro strips for securing tools, elastic cords for keeping items from drifting, and walls lined with grips like a climbing gym for the gently floating. Without those, life becomes a series of slow collisions, each one sending you off in an unexpected direction. Eating takes on a new set of challenges. Without gravity, liquids form spheres, held together by surface tension. You cannot pour tea into a mug, you have to coax it in, guiding the floating blob into place. If you miss, it will wander off intact, waiting for someone to bump it. Even solid food becomes mischievous. A biscuit you bite into will send crumbs out in all directions, and without gravity, they will not fall to the floor. They will hover until someone waves them away, little edible asteroids in the domestic cosmos. Storage becomes more important than ever. In a house without gravity, anything unsecured will eventually float into something else. The plant that was hovering harmlessly in the corner might drift into a hanging light. The remote control that escaped your hand could vanish behind a curtain, only to emerge hours later like it has returned from an adventure. Astronauts keep things in sealed bags, tucked into pockets, or clipped to themselves to avoid this slow-motion chaos. At home, you would have to adopt similar habits, not because things will crash violently, but because they will quietly migrate to wherever the air or your movements take them. The absence of weight also changes the way your muscles feel. Standing and walking are gone. You're always in a kind of glide, unless you anchor yourself to something. Your legs, no longer pushing against the ground, start to relax in ways they never could before. Your arms, however, work more, pulling you along or stabilizing your position. In space, astronauts experience this same shift. Their legs lose strength over time, while their arms and shoulders grow more accustomed to constant use. Without resistance from gravity, bones slowly weaken unless they are exercised against some other force. Even small sounds seem different. Without footsteps or the thump of objects hitting surfaces, the house grows quieter. The creak of a stair is gone, the slam of a cupboard door is replaced by a gentle thud as it meets the frame and drifts shut. The rhythm of life changes. Movement is slower, more deliberate, and more connected to everything else in the room. You notice how much your daily life depended on gravity to quietly tidy up motion, to end things when you let them go, to hold you in place without asking. There is a curious beauty to it all. The biscuit packet that floated away earlier is now hovering near the ceiling, softly turning as though on display. The plant, freed from its pot by a bump, spreads its roots in a delicate fan. The air's filled with tiny shifting worlds, a crumb, a drop of tea, a hairbrush, each one moving on its own private journey, guided only by the nudges it receives. It is a reminder that stillness, as we know it, was always an illusion maintained by gravity. Without it, everything is moving, just slowly enough for you to watch. Life at home has become a kind of gentle choreography. You learn where to push and where to hold on. You discover that doors, once just passageways, are now anchors. You find yourself catching objects not by grabbing them, but by matching their movement before closing your hand. Even your pets, after a while, begin to adapt. The cat learns to launch off walls with precision. The dog figures out how to reach a drifting toy. What began as confusion becomes play, and what began as a house becomes something closer to a personal space station, where every movement is shared between you and everything around you. The streets are no longer the place you remember. The line between road and sky has blurred into something strange and dreamlike. Cars that once sat firmly on their tyres now hover a few centimetres above the tarmac, drifting in whatever direction their last push took them. Without the constant pull pressing rubber to the road, friction has almost vanished. A driver who had been rolling slowly toward a junction now glides straight past it, their steering wheel turning pointlessly in their hands. The car obeys the rules of inertia rather than the traffic code, continuing in a gentle slide until it meets something else. Bicycles have become whimsical, airborne sculptures. Riders find themselves floating sideways off their seats, their pedals spinning freely under shoes that no longer press down with weight. Some manage to keep moving by pushing at the air, though it is far less effective than solid ground. Others abandon the idea of steering entirely and simply drift alongside their bikes, the two of them tethered by habit more than necessity. The air is alive with smaller things. Crisp packets and takeaway coffee cups rise from where they were dropped, carried upward in slow spirals. Street signs tremble as the poles that held them in tension relax, and some of the lighter ones break free, turning lazily as they begin a slow ascent. Newspapers flap once or twice before surrendering to the still air, each page curling into its own leisurely spin. Leaves, bits of gravel, and the occasional glove wander together in clusters, forming strange little flocks that move wherever the wind chooses. There is a certain beauty to it, but also a hint of caution. A half-empty drinks-can floats at head height, its remaining liquid sloshing in a hypnotic rhythm. It is harmless at this pace, but if given a good push, perhaps by a startled passer-by, it would continue in that direction until the air gradually slowed it. Even a modestly sharp object, once freed from the ground, has no reason to fall away from you. A glass bottle that slipped from someone's hand would not shatter instantly. It would travel in a graceful, stubborn line until something stopped it, which could be a wall, a window, or another person. Larger objects are just as unpredictable. A delivery van, abandoned in confusion, drifts into the middle of an intersection. It does not crash with noise or drama, but with a soft contact that sends it rebounding in a new direction, its side mirror tracing an arc through the air. Without gravity to hold it down, its mass is unchanged. It still has the same resistance to being moved, but once moving, it takes a long time to stop. The rules of motion are the same ones that have always been there, but now you see them at work with nothing to disguise them. People adapt in surprising ways. Some grab onto lamp posts and railings, using them as anchors while they watch the street slowly rearrange itself. Others experiment, pushing off parked vehicles or shop walls to travel short distances, learning how much effort it takes to start and stop. A group of teenagers take turns launching themselves from the top of a bus shelter, gliding across the street to the opposite pavement. Their laughter carries easily through the still air, undisturbed by the usual rumble of engines. In the absence of normal traffic sounds, the city has a different rhythm. The hum of engines is gone, replaced by the occasional clink of something metal, tapping another object in passing. The air feels softer, almost padded, because there is less vibration coming from the ground. Even the pigeons seem confused, circling uncertainly as the updrafts they once rode vanish without gravity to make warm air rise. They are still masters of steering though, and adjust quickly, swooping past floating rubbish bags with deliberate flicks of their wings. Shopfront displays slowly dismantle themselves. Lightweight items work loose from their stacks, drifting just beyond the reach of their original shelves. A plastic mannequin from a clothing shop tips forward, its feet no longer locked to the floor by weight. It turns gently in mid-air, a silent, rotating sentry now facing entirely the wrong way. Pedestrians give it a wide berth, not because it poses a real danger, but because in this new world, anything moving in your direction deserves a little space until you know what it plans to do. In more open areas, the drifting becomes more dramatic. Without anything to catch on, a wayward shopping trolley keeps going for many meters, wheels spinning pointlessly in the air. It eventually meets a bus stop sign with a muffled tap, the two of them continuing on together like old friends out for a walk. A row of bicycles chained together shift sideways as the whole rack slides free from the pavement, moving in a slow, dignified parade down the street. There are occasional moments of unplanned comedy. A man chasing his hat finds that each lunge only pushes him farther from it. A skateboard, once kicked in frustration, sails away at a steady pace, ignoring the calls of its former rider. A small dog, having wriggled free of its harness, floats happily down the high street, propelled by the wagging of its tail, until a nearby stranger catches it by the scruff and sends it drifting gently back to its owner. The surreal quality of it all is balanced by the realization that movement here does not have the natural ending gravity once provided. In the old world, a dropped item would fall to the ground where it could be picked up or avoided. Now it will continue until it meets another surface, which might be minutes or even hours later. This makes predicting the paths of objects more important, not because they will hit hard, but because they will not politely stop before they reach you. The wind, too, plays a more visible role. Gusts that once ruffled clothing now send entire objects into new courses. A stiff breeze down a street can gather cups, paper, and even small tools into a loose convoy, turning the corner together as though rehearsed. Without gravity pulling everything firmly down, the boundary between the air and the ground feels thinner, more negotiable. Looking down a long avenue, the view is transformed. Vehicles and bicycles hover like toys in a snow globe, their movements slow and meandering. Bits of paper swirl high above the shop fronts, catching the sunlight before drifting back into the shade. The outlines of the city are still there, the curbs, the painted road markings, but they feel like relics of a system that has quietly expired. In its place is something quieter, stranger, and oddly elegant, where the rules have shifted but motion still writes its stories across the streets, just at a pace you can finally watch unfold. At the coast, the familiar meeting place of land and sea has lost its boundary. The shoreline, once a shifting line traced by the pull of tides and the rhythm of waves, begins to blur. Without gravity pressing the water down, the ocean hesitates for a moment, as though unsure of what to do next. Then, with unhurried grace, it starts to lift away. The change is not a violent draining or a sudden disappearance, but a slow unfastening, like a vast sheet of silk being peeled from the surface of the earth. Where waves once crashed in foaming bursts, their crests now detach. The arcs of water hang in place for a moment, perfect in their shape, before the trough below them rises to meet them, folding together into a thick, rounded mass. These growing bodies of water pull at the surrounding surface, drawing more into themselves, swelling as they go. They do not flatten back into the sea. Instead, they round themselves out, becoming enormous, shimmering spheres that hover above where the ocean used to be. From the beach, the scene is mesmerizing. A swell approaches, but rather than breaking against the sand, it bulges upward, its own weight no longer forcing it down. Sunlight scatters through it, breaking into threads and glimmers, turning the mass into a floating jewel. Droplets shear off from its surface, but instead of falling, they collect into smaller spheres, trailing behind like beads on an invisible string. These droplets will drift for meters before air resistance slows them, the path of each one as unpredictable as the flight of a dandelion seed. Surface tension has now become the dominant sculptor. Normally, gravity flattens the sea's surface and keeps its restless motion pressed into place. Without that downward pull, the water's own molecular cohesion takes over. Every molecule is attracted to the ones around it, and in the absence of a stronger force, that attraction pulls the liquid into the smallest possible surface area for its volume, a sphere. It is the same effect that makes raindrops round, only now it is working on a scale so large it would be unthinkable under ordinary circumstances. The first great sphere near the shore is the size of a small hill turning slowly in the air. The movement within it is hypnotic. Currents continue for a while, momentum from the last winds and tides twisting through its interior. Sand and small shells trapped inside drift gently, as though moving through a vast aquarium. Fish are there too, circling slowly, their instincts telling them to swim, though there is no longer an up or down to guide them. Beyond the first few floating masses, the rest of the ocean begins to follow. The flat horizon grows uneven, bulging in multiple places where the surface has begun to pull upward. Smaller globes break free and rise a few meters above the water, catching the light in brilliant flashes before drifting sideways on the breeze. The sound of the shore changes. The constant roar of surf is gone, replaced by a softer sloshing as moving blobs of water brush against one another and merge. Every collision is slow and deliberate, ending with the two joining into a larger, more perfect sphere. Walking where the water used to be is a strange experience. The sand is damp but no longer lapped by waves. Pools remain in the dips and hollows, but even these are rounding off at the edges, lifting their edges into shallow domes. Tiny crabs wander in confusion, their world's defining boundary having been erased in the span of a few minutes. Seaweed, freed from the push and pull of the tide, hovers just above the sand, swaying only when a passing current brushes past it. Farther out, the larger spheres begin to rise slowly from the surface, leaving the rest of the ocean behind. They do not drift away at speed. Water is heavy in the sense of having a lot of mass, even without weight, and it takes time for air resistance and momentum to set a course. Some hover just above the surface, attached to the rest by a narrowing tether of water. The tether stretches, thins and finally snaps, the smaller part whipping back into the parent sphere in a ripple that travels across its surface. The clarity of the water within these spheres varies. Some are crystal clear, refracting the landscape around them in shifting patterns, bending houses, cliffs and clouds into impossible shapes. Others are clouded with churned sand or plant life, giving them the appearance of enormous marbles drifting above the earth. In places where sunlight catches them at just the right angle, they flash with rainbows, a reminder that water, for all its familiarity, is still a master of bending light to its will. Marine animals find themselves inside these floating worlds, with little understanding of their new boundaries. Schools of fish swim in looping paths, unable to rely on gravity to orient themselves. Some simply hover, their fins making slight adjustments to keep them from bumping into their new spherical walls. Larger creatures like dolphins or seals move more decisively, but every leap and twist is altered by the absence of weight, sending them drifting more slowly than before. On a grander scale, the separation of water from the Earth's surface changes the texture of the planet itself. Coastlines lose their familiar shape as bays and inlets empty into the air, forming their own globes or merging into others. Rivers, without gravity to guide them downhill, no longer flow toward the sea. They too pull themselves into rounded bodies, suspended above the ground like a necklace of beads stretching across the landscape. There is an eerie calm to the entire scene. Without the crashing of waves or the ceaseless motion of the tide, the ocean feels frozen in time, even though it is more mobile than ever. The great spheres drift slowly, changing position over minutes or hours rather than seconds. When two meet, their surfaces deform slightly before snapping back into shape, the combined mass pulling itself into a new sphere that is just a little larger than before. The scale of it is almost too much to take in. Imagine standing where the water's edge once was, looking out over a patchwork of hovering oceans, each a world unto itself, each moving at its own patient pace. The sky feels closer somehow, reflected and refracted in every floating surface, a mosaic of shifting blues and whites. Every now and then, a smaller sphere breaks away and begins to wander inland, rolling silently through streets or fields, its path determined only by the faintest movement of the air. This rearranged ocean obeys the same physics as a drop of water in space. Astronauts on the International Space Station see it on a miniature scale when they release a globule of juice or tea into the air. The liquid rounds off perfectly, trembling slightly as surface tension holds it together. In both cases, whether in a space station or on a planet without gravity, it is the balance of molecular attraction that dictates shape and motion, no longer competing with the constant pull of a massive body below. In this new state, the ocean is both familiar and alien. Its colour, its clarity, and even its scent are unchanged, but its behaviour is something no one on Earth has ever seen. It no longer belongs to the shore, no longer wears the shape of the basins that once held it. Instead, it floats free, bound only to itself, a collection of roaming liquid planets tracing slow, graceful paths through the air. Each one carries a piece of the old world inside it, sand, fish, currents. But their new form belongs to a place where down no longer exists, and the sea has finally taken to the sky. The air has always been the most invisible part of our world, so ordinary in its presence that we only notice it when the wind picks up, or the weather changes. Yet it is here, all around us, because gravity has been quietly holding on to it for billions of years. Every molecule of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide and the rest is bound to the Earth by that steady pull. Without it, air would behave exactly like water without gravity. It would stop being anchored and begin to wander. On a normal day, the atmosphere forms a kind of invisible ocean, with pressure at the surface caused by the weight of all the air above you. It is thicker near the ground because gravity tugs every molecule toward the planet's centre. Higher up, the pull is a little weaker and the air is thinner. That gradient, dense at the bottom, thin at the top, is entirely the work of gravity. It's what keeps your lungs filled with air at sea level without you even thinking about it. The moment that pull disappears, the balance breaks. Air molecules, no longer bound to the planet, begin to move according to their own energies. Molecules of gas are in constant motion, bouncing off one another at hundreds of meters per second, and they were always trying to escape before. But gravity's pull was enough to keep most of them close. Now, nothing stops them from taking the same path they would in space, spreading out indefinitely in every direction. It doesn't all vanish instantly. The molecules closest to the ground will collide with each other for some time before drifting far enough apart to feel the openness beyond. But slowly, the pressure begins to drop. The air feels thinner, not in a gusty or stormy way, but in a quiet, almost imperceptible decline. Your breathing deepens without you noticing, your body adjusting automatically to take in more oxygen. At first, there is no visible sign of anything wrong. The grass still moves when you walk through it, trees still rustle if there's a breeze, and clouds still drift overhead. But each of those movements is a little softer, the currents in the air a little weaker. As hours pass, the change becomes clearer. With less and less air above to scatter sunlight, the blue of the sky begins to fade. On an ordinary day, sunlight passes through the atmosphere and molecules of gas scatter the shorter wavelengths, the blues and violets, in all directions. Your eyes are more sensitive to blue than violet, so the whole sky takes on that familiar bright hue. But as the air thins, there are fewer molecules to do the scattering. The blue becomes paler, as though the sky has been washed in sunlight too many times. Eventually, the colour begins to lose its saturation entirely. You can still see the sun, perhaps even more sharply than before, but around it the sky takes on a washed-out steel tone. Higher in the sky, patches of deepening indigo begin to appear. The blackness of space is edging closer. Even during the day, you start to see the faintest outlines of stars, the background usually hidden by the scattering now peeking through the fading veil. Meanwhile, sound itself starts to change. Air carries sound waves, and when there is less air, there are fewer molecules to pass those vibrations along. Voices do not travel as far, footsteps sound softer. Even the sea, or what remains of it, becomes quieter, its waves no longer booming against the shore. The thinning air robs everything of volume, until the world feels muffled, like a great library where even the wind has been told to whisper. From a scientific perspective, the gradual escape of the atmosphere is inevitable without gravity. Each molecule's motion is random, and over time enough of them head upward instead of sideways. Once high enough, with no pull to bring them back, they simply keep going. Lighter molecules like hydrogen and helium slip away faster, but even the heavier nitrogen and oxygen will drift off eventually. The difference is just a matter of speed. You might expect to feel weightless as the air leaves, but weightlessness has nothing to do with the atmosphere itself. Instead, what you notice is the subtle shift in temperature. Without a thick blanket of air to trap heat, warmth from the sun is no longer stored and shared between molecules. Sunlit areas grow hotter in the day, shadows cool more quickly. It's a version of what happens on the moon, a place with no atmosphere at all, where temperatures swing wildly from boiling in the light to freezing in the dark. Birds feel the change too. At first, they can still beat their wings against what remains of the air, but as the density drops, their lift diminishes. Flight takes more effort, then becomes impossible altogether. Insects, once masters of maneuvering in the lower sky, lose control as the air becomes too thin to push against. Even pollen and dust behave differently, settling more slowly because they no longer have the downward tug to guide them, yet unable to float forever without the gentle support of a full atmosphere. The higher you go, the more dramatic the effect. On tall hills and mountains, the air was already thinner to begin with, so the disappearance is faster. People living at altitude find their breath shortening sooner than those near sea level. The sun's light feels harsher here, because with fewer particles to scatter it, more ultraviolet and infrared radiation passes straight through. Shadows grow sharper, their edges more defined. Eventually the blue is gone entirely. The sun shines from a background of deep black, a sight normally reserved for astronauts. Stars are bright and unwavering, their twinkle muted because twinkling is the result of starlight bending through moving layers of air. Without enough atmosphere to cause that bending, stars simply sit in place, perfect pinpricks of light. It is beautiful in its way, but also strangely exposed, as though the protective dome of the sky has been removed, leaving you under the direct gaze of the universe. For all its quietness, the vanishing of the atmosphere is one of the most profound changes that could ever happen to a planet. Without air, there is no weather, no clouds to carry water inland, no shield against meteors or solar radiation. Sound, flight, and breathable life all depend on those countless molecules staying close. Gravity was the only thing keeping them here, and without it, the air is just as free to wander as anything else. The last traces linger near the surface the longest, swirled and nudged by your movements, warmed and cooled by whatever heat is left in the ground and water. You can feel them in the faintest of breezes, a whisper of the old world that will soon join the rest, expanding into the endless dark until it can no longer be called Earth's at all. The sky, once a shifting canopy of blue and cloud, is now simply space, and the air that once filled your lungs is part of the great, silent ocean between the stars. From above the planet, the change would be obvious long before anyone on the ground could fully appreciate it. Earth has always been a dancer in the sun's gravitational embrace, circling endlessly because that steady pull bends its path into a loop. Without gravity, that loop unravels instantly. The moment the connection is broken, Earth stops curving around the sun and begins to move in a straight line, continuing in the exact direction it was headed at the instant the pull disappeared. This isn't because something pushes it away. In fact, nothing new is pushing at all. It's simply that without the sun's tug, there's no reason for Earth's motion to keep bending into an orbit. The planet is already moving at roughly 107,000 kilometers per hour in its journey around the sun, and now that speed becomes a straight, unchanging trajectory. Imagine it like spinning a stone tied to a sling. As long as you keep the sling taut, the stone circles you. Let go. And it doesn't spiral outward. It simply flies off in the direction it was going at that exact moment, travelling in a straight path forever unless something else interferes. The idea feels strange because we're so used to seeing things slow down when we stop pushing them. A rolling ball stops, a thrown stick drops to the ground. That's because on Earth, friction and gravity are always there to bleed away momentum. In space, without air to resist and without a gravitational pull to curve the path, motion is astonishingly stubborn. Once you're moving, you keep moving. Earth's path around the sun has always been a careful balance between two factors: its forward speed and the sun's pull. The forward speed tries to carry it straight ahead, while gravity continuously tugs it inward. The result is a curve so precise that Earth retraces it year after year. Take away the tug, and the forward speed wins. Instead of circling, we simply continue in the last direction of travel, like a ship leaving its safe harbour and heading into the deep, dark sea. The rotation of the Earth, its daily spin, is a separate matter. Gravity doesn't hold the spin in place, momentum does. The planet will keep turning on its axis just as it always has, at a little over 1,600 kilometers per hour at the equator, That means day and night will continue, at least for a while, as the planet coasts through space. The sun will still rise and set in the sky, but its position will slowly drift over time because we're no longer locked in orbit. At first, the difference is barely noticeable. The sun just a little lower or higher each day at the same time, but gradually the change becomes undeniable. It's worth pausing to think about how fast all of this already was before gravity's disappearance. The idea of being still is an illusion. Even standing in your living room, you are moving at the speed of Earth's rotation, circling the sun at 107,000 kilometers per hour and being carried along with the sun itself as it moves through the galaxy at nearly 800,000 kilometers per hour. We never felt it because the motion was constant. Now, stripped of the sun's anchor, we've simply kept one of those motions and lost the curve that used to tie it into a loop. If you could watch the whole solar system from a distance, the result would look like a slow-motion explosion. Planets that once swept along their paths now sail away, each continuing in whatever direction they were headed at the instant gravity let go. Some move roughly parallel, others angle away from the sun, but none turn back. The geometry of the orbits freezes like beads breaking off a necklace, each one taking its own line across the dark. For Earth, the straight path leads it away from the warmth and light that made life possible. At first, the distance grows slowly enough that sunlight still feels familiar. The shift is subtle, a fraction less heat, a slightly dimmer glow, but it builds with every passing week. Without the constant inward pull, the gap between Earth and the sun increases relentlessly, the sun shrinking in the sky while the nights grow longer and colder. The absence of the sun's gravity also frees the moon from its own path around Earth. The moon had been falling toward us constantly, its motion bent into a circle by our pull. Without that pull, it too flies off in a straight line, its path no longer matching ours except by coincidence. In the nights immediately following, you might still see it close by, but soon it drifts away into its own solitary journey. Explaining why planets orbit rather than fly away is one of the great successes of classical physics. Sir Isaac Newton, centuries ago, imagined a cannonball fired from a mountaintop. Fire it slowly, and it arcs downward, hitting the ground nearby. Fire it faster, and it travels farther before touching down. Fire it at just the right speed, and the ground curves away beneath it at the same rate it's falling. It never lands at all, circling endlessly instead. That perfect balance is an orbit. Fire it faster still, and it escapes entirely, never to return. The instant gravity stops, every planet's cannonball speed becomes an escape speed, and all orbits dissolve into straight lines. There's a quiet elegance to how predictable the motion is once you understand the rules. With gravity, paths are curves. Without gravity, paths are lines. It's the simplest shift imaginable, yet its consequences ripple out through everything. The warmth of the seasons, the constancy of the sky, the very idea of a year. Inertia is the heart of it. The same principle that makes a book slide across a table until friction stops it is the one that carries Earth onward without the sun's hold. The difference is that space offers no friction at all. In the vast emptiness, a straight path will continue unchanged for billions of years unless another massive object intervenes. That could be a wandering star, a dense cloud of gas, or the distant pull of a galaxy's gravity well, but all of those are rare encounters on the scale of human time. For all practical purposes, Earth is now on a one-way trip into the depths of interstellar space. There's an almost poetic shift in perspective here. We're used to thinking of Earth as being in orbit, a loyal companion to the sun, returning again and again along the same path. Without gravity, that loyalty is gone, replaced by an independence that feels more like exile. The sun will grow smaller, the constellations will slowly warp as our viewpoint changes, and the comfortable cycles that have repeated for 4.5 billion years will be replaced by a single unending trajectory. From the ground, you would see little of this change in the first hours. The sun would still rise and set, the wind would still stir the leaves, and the familiar constellations would appear at night. But already, the mathematics would be in motion. The great curve of our orbit flattening into a straight escape line, the gravitational tether that held us gently for so long now absent. The solar system is no longer a family held together. It has become a scattering, each world following its own quiet, determined path through the dark. It's a reminder that orbits are not natural places for objects to be. They are the results of precise conditions. They are dances maintained by the constant pull of gravity, and without that pull there is no dance at all, just the long glide outward, away from the warmth that made the world what it is. The Earth's rotation continues, the days and nights keep their rhythm, but our place in the cosmic neighbourhood has changed forever. We're no longer circling home. We're leaving it. For as long as humans have looked up, the moon has been there, patient, unblinking, and utterly reliable. It has marked the passing of months, guided sailors across oceans, inspired myths, and given poets something to write about when they ran out of other ideas. It has never failed to rise, never slipped from its schedule, never been absent from its place in the sky. And then, in an instant, it is gone. The moon had always been bound to Earth by gravity, held in an endless game of chase where it fell toward us at the exact rate our planet curved away beneath it. Without that pull, there is nothing to bend its path anymore. It simply keeps going in the direction it was moving at the moment gravity let go. One heartbeat, it is gliding through its familiar orbit. The next, it is sailing off into deep space, untethered and untroubled. From the ground, the change is subtle at first. The moon doesn't streak away like a rocket. It drifts, moving at the same speed it had before, only now without the curve that kept it circling us. To the naked eye, it seems to hang in roughly the same spot in the sky for a short time. But as hours pass, it begins to shift in a way that no night owl or early riser could miss. Its path no longer aligns with the rhythm of the stars. It's as though the choreography has gone wrong, the dancer leaving the stage in the middle of the performance. The emotional weight of that absence lands quickly. For many, the moon has always been a quiet comfort, something constant above the chaos of life. Entire traditions have been built around it. Farmers once planned harvests by its light. Festivals in every culture have tied their celebrations to its phases. Lovers have taken long walks under its glow, telling themselves the moon was witness to their moment. Without it, the sky feels emptier, colder, stripped of something both familiar and deeply human. Astronomically speaking, the loss is just as profound. The moon has shaped Earth for billions of years, from controlling the tides to stabilizing our axial tilt, which keeps seasons from swinging into extremes. Without it, the pull between us and our oceans weakens to almost nothing. Tides flatten into gentle ripples dictated only by the sun's gravity. Entire coastal ecosystems built around the rhythm of high and low tide are suddenly without their heartbeat. Yet the most immediate change is visual. The night no longer has its silver lantern. Without moonlight, the darkness deepens dramatically. For anyone who has grown up in a world lit by that soft, diffuse glow, the transformation is startling. Countryside nights become inky black, with no gradual transition from twilight to darkness. It's as if someone has dimmed the world in an instant. The phrase moonlit walk becomes an anachronism, replaced by the far less romantic torchlit stumble. Moonlight walks now need a flashlight, and anyone attempting to recite poetry about the gentle glow of a rechargeable LED will have a much harder time making it sound appealing. The stars, however, gain something in the exchange. Without the moon's brightness to wash them out, more of them are visible. The Milky Way emerges in full splendour, a dense river of light stretching across the sky. Fainter constellations reveal themselves, ones usually hidden from all but the most dedicated stargazers. The night becomes a planetarium show on the largest possible scale. For astronomers, both professional and amateur, the loss is bittersweet. Scientifically fascinating, but culturally heartbreaking. In the days following its departure, Telescopes track the moon as it recedes, still bright but shrinking slightly with distance. Its familiar craters and Maria remain visible for a while, then begin to fade as it moves further away. Eventually it becomes just another wandering object in the vast catalogue of celestial bodies, destined to drift for millions or even billions of years. It may pass near other planets or moons, but the odds of it being captured into another orbit are slim. More likely it will wander the galaxy, carrying the story of its time around Earth as nothing more than a memory in the rocks. The cultural ripple spreads quickly. Flags planted on the moon during space missions are no longer part of our shared heritage in quite the same way. They are now deep space artifacts. The man in the moon is evicted from the human imagination, his face replaced by the unblinking gaze of distant stars. Lunar calendars stop in their tracks, never to be restarted. Even the word month, rooted in the moon cycle, becomes a historical curiosity. And yet there is a strange dignity in the way it leaves. It does not crash to Earth or shatter into fragments. It simply carries on with the speed it already had, a silent, steady traveller now on its own course. The forces that once tied it to us are gone, but it moves without hesitation, without drama. A reminder that motion in space is less about force and more about the absence of resistance. For storytellers, the moon's disappearance becomes the new myth. It is remembered not as a violent end, but as a quiet parting. Generations might speak of the time when the moon and Earth drifted apart, not through anger or accident, but because one could no longer hold on to the other. In its place, perhaps new symbols would rise, bright planets like Venus, or constellations reshaped by the absence of that one, constant disk. And for those who stand under the first truly moonless night, there is a moment of reckoning. The stars are sharper, the darkness deeper, the air somehow more immense. The moon's absence is more than just a change in the sky. It is the loss of a shared reference point, the quiet companion that had been with humanity since before we had words to describe it. Life goes on, but the sky will never look quite the same again. The rhythm of the tides has been a quiet metronome for Earth's coasts for billions of years. Twice each day, the water would rise and fall in a slow, predictable cycle, driven mainly by the moon's pull and nudged by the sun's gravity. It was such a constant part of life that few stopped to think about it until the moon left. Without its tug, the tides flatten into little more than subtle bulges caused by the sun alone, barely noticeable in most places. For coastal ecosystems, that absence is like a heartbeat stopping. Countless species have evolved to match their lives to the turning of that watery clock. The intertidal zone, that narrow strip of land alternately covered and uncovered by the sea, becomes something entirely different without regular flooding and draining. It had always been a place of drama, where mussels clung to rocks against the crash of waves, where barnacles sealed themselves tight during low tide, and where shorebirds darted in to feast on creatures stranded in tide pools. Now the line between land and sea freezes in place. Without the daily surge of water, many animals lose their cues for feeding and reproduction. Horseshoe crabs, for example, have for millions of years used the higher spring tides to come ashore and lay eggs, ensuring their offspring would be safe above the normal reach of the waves. With the great lunar tides gone, those highest water levels never arrive. The crab's timing becomes meaningless, and entire breeding cycles are thrown into confusion. Fish that spawn in estuaries also rely on tidal flows. Some species, like certain types of mullet and herring, time their movements to the flood tide, riding the incoming water to reach sheltered bays where their young can grow. Without the rising water to carry them inland, these migrations falter. Juvenile fish are left more exposed to predators, and fewer survive to adulthood. Many invertebrates depend on the tides not just for movement but for food delivery. Filter feeders such as clams, oysters and mussels depend on the ebb and flow to bring fresh plankton-rich water twice a day. In still water, nutrients can stagnate, reducing the food supply. Growth slows, reproduction drops, and populations shrink. The same happens for the small creatures that live in tide pools, which without the regular replenishment of oxygenated seawater become isolated, warmer, and more vulnerable to sudden changes in salinity. Seaweeds and marine plants also suffer. Kelp forests and seagrass beds benefit from tidal action that stirs the water, preventing the build-up of sediments and delivering dissolved nutrients. Without that motion, fine particles settle on leaves and fronds, blocking light and slowing photosynthesis. Over time, these habitats shrink, taking with them the thousands of species that depend on them for shelter. The loss ripples outward. Shorebirds that rely on exposed mudflats at low tide to find worms, and small crustaceans suddenly lose access to those food sources. Fewer birds come to the coast, and those that do face fiercer competition. Predators that depend on these birds, from foxes to raptors, feel the effect next. Entire food webs unravel from a change that started with the moon's absence. Even the chemistry of the water begins to shift. Tidal currents help mix ocean layers, distributing oxygen from the surface down to deeper waters. Without that mixing, oxygen levels drop in some areas, creating low oxygen zones where fewer animals can survive. Decomposition of organic matter accelerates in these pockets, further depleting oxygen and reinforcing the cycle. Humans too feel the absence. Coastal communities have fished these waters for generations, often timing their harvests to the tides. Shellfish beds that once thrived become less productive. The calm, unchanging shoreline might seem safer, but it also means harbours don't flush themselves naturally anymore. Without the scouring action of tidal currents, sediment builds up, and channels need constant dredging to remain navigable. The visual change is striking. Beaches that once alternated between wide stretches of sand and narrow strips at high tide now stay in one fixed state. The drama of the tide's arrival and retreat, the shifting textures of wet sand, the gleam of receding water, is gone. Rock pools remain where they are until evaporation leaves them dry or storms replenish them. The coastal soundscape changes too. Without the push and pull of large tides, waves are smaller, less forceful. The crash of surf gives way to a gentler, almost hesitant lapping. Some life adapts. Certain hardy species thrive in the newfound stability, settling in places that were once risky because of constant water movement. Algae grow in thicker mats along some shores, unchecked by the scouring tides. A few opportunistic predators take advantage of prey that can no longer hide in shifting waters. But these winners are few compared to the number of species that lose their place in the balance. It's a reminder that tides are more than just a twice-daily spectacle. They are a planetary breathing rhythm, drawing water in and out in ways that shape coastlines, feed life, and keep oceans healthy. That rhythm is ancient. It began when the moon was much closer, its pull stronger, and the tides far more extreme. Over billions of years, the moon drifted away from Earth, and the tides gentled, but they never stopped. Now, with the moon gone entirely, that long history ends. What remains is a quieter ocean, less dramatic, less varied. The line between land and sea has lost its pulse, and with it the countless small dramas that played out each day. For those who lived their lives by the tides, whether human or animal, the change is as profound as losing the moon itself. The ocean still moves under the wind and storms, but the great predictable breath that once shaped it has fallen silent. The sun has always been our anchor, not just a source of light and warmth, but the steady centre around which our entire calendar, our seasons and our idea of time itself have revolved. With gravity gone, that invisible tether between Earth and the sun has snapped. We are no longer in orbit, no longer moving in a graceful curve around our star. Instead, we continue in a straight line, the path we were travelling at the moment gravity let go, carrying us ever farther from the warmth we once took for granted. At first, the change is subtle. The sun still blazes in the sky, and the days feel almost normal, but the perfect balance that has kept our climate stable is gone. Without our orbit holding us at a consistent distance, we begin to drift into the wider solar system. The sun's pull can no longer rein us in, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the great disk of light begins to shrink. The Earth's rotation continues, giving us day and night, but the meaning of seasons vanishes. The tilt of our axis still exists, but it no longer brings the alternating cycles of warmth and cold. Instead, the entire planet begins to cool as we move away from the sun. The shift happens over weeks and months. The average global temperature begins to drop by fractions of a degree at first, but those small numbers carry enormous consequences. In the first few months, winters become harsher and longer. Summer heat lingers less, struggling to offset the cooling trend. Crops in temperate zones fail to ripen, frost appearing earlier and staying later. Spring becomes an abbreviated chilly season, and autumn feels more like a prelude to an endless cold. Within a year, the difference is undeniable. Oceans begin to form thin crusts of ice farther from the poles, and snow lines creep toward the equator. The sun, viewed from Earth, now appears smaller in the sky, its comforting presence diminished. Where it once spanned half a degree of our view, it begins to look more like an extremely bright star, its warmth weaker with each passing day. Light still falls on our world, but it lacks the intensity needed to drive the water cycle in the way we knew. Clouds become rarer as evaporation slows, rainfall declines. The once dynamic interplay of weather systems quiets, replaced by still, dry air. This calm is eerie, almost unsettling. Winds weaken because they are driven by temperature differences between regions, and as the entire globe cools, those differences fade. Storms grow less frequent, their once powerful systems unable to muster the energy they need. The planet begins to feel unnervingly still. Even the oceans become sluggish, their great currents slowing without the same solar heating to drive them. The silence extends beyond Earth. Without our orbit, we pass through parts of the solar system we were never meant to visit. The familiar dance of the planets, Mercury racing around the Sun in just 88 days, Jupiter lumbering through its 12-year circuit, continues without us. They now move along their old paths while Earth drifts on an entirely new trajectory. We might pass closer to Mars or further from it, but we are no longer bound to keep company with our planetary neighbours. The cooling accelerates the farther we drift. Within a few years, average temperatures fall well below freezing in most regions. Oceans near the poles freeze solid, pushing ice farther toward the tropics each winter. Life struggles to adapt. Animals migrate toward the equator in search of warmth, but even the equator now feels like a mild polar region. Civilization adapts unevenly. Some communities move underground or into insulated habitats, attempting to preserve heat. Greenhouses become vital, using artificial light to grow food. The energy needed to sustain human life skyrockets as heating becomes essential everywhere. Fossil fuels, already dwindling in many regions, cannot keep up forever, and renewable energy from sunlight becomes less effective as the sun dims with distance. Nuclear power and other alternative sources take on new urgency. Meanwhile, the night sky changes in a way no human has ever witnessed. As we leave our familiar orbit, the constellations remain, but their arrangement relative to the sun alters subtly. The stars, so constant to generations of observers, now seem to wheel in unfamiliar ways as Earth's path cuts through space at a new angle. The planets we once saw near the ecliptic, the thin line in the sky where the sun and planets appear, drift into new positions as our perspective shifts more each month. For a while, the sun remains the brightest object in our sky, even as it shrinks, but eventually its size becomes comparable to Venus at its brightest, a dazzling but distant jewel rather than a blazing fire. Our days become dimmer, more like permanent twilight. Shadows lengthen unnaturally. The warmth on our skin, that simple pleasure we once thought inexhaustible, becomes a rare memory. The silence grows deeper. Without the constant hum of weather, Without the crash of waves against the shore, Earth's surface becomes quieter than at any time in its history. Snow muffles sound, and the few remaining winds whisper rather than howl. Human activity becomes the dominant noise in many places. The hum of generators, the clatter of machinery, the faint voices of people huddled together for warmth. There is still beauty in this drifting world. The stars burn brighter without the sun's glare dominating the sky. In some places the Milky Way glows so intensely that it casts faint shadows. Comets, which once appeared rarely, are now encountered more often as we stray into new regions of the solar system. Distant planets shimmer in the blackness, their surfaces illuminated by a sun that is now far behind us. But beauty does not erase the reality. Earth is no longer part of the delicate clockwork of the solar system. We are a wanderer, set adrift in the vast dark, slowly cooling under a sun that grows smaller every day. The stability we once took for granted, the regular turning of the seasons, the predictable rising and setting of the sun, has ended. What remains is a planet moving forward without destination, carrying the remnants of life into the deep silence of space. The solar system has always been a masterpiece of balance, a grand cosmic dance choreographed by gravity. Each planet, moon, and asteroid follows a path defined by the pull of the sun, their motions linked together in a web of invisible forces. But once gravity is gone, that delicate structure begins to collapse. The sun can no longer hold its family close, and the planets, no longer tethered, begin to drift into the void. Jupiter, the giant of the solar system, is among the first to show the change. Without the sun's pull, it no longer sweeps along its wide orbit. Instead, it continues in a straight line from the position it occupied at the instant gravity vanished. Its immense size and momentum mean it barrels forward steadily, but its connection to everything else is severed. The dozens of moons that once circled it, including volcanic Io and icy Europa, are suddenly without their own gravitational anchor. Freed from Jupiter's pull, they scatter like pearls rolling off a broken string. Some drift alongside for a time, travelling in parallel paths before subtle differences in speed send them in entirely different directions. Others wander off almost immediately, becoming lonely travellers in the darkness. Saturn follows a similar fate. The jewel of the solar system with its shimmering rings becomes just another solitary body on a one-way journey. Its moons, from giant Titan with its methane seas to tiny irregular rocks, also lose their orbits. The rings, so perfectly balanced for millions of years, begin to disperse. Without Saturn's grip, each icy particle that once circled in an orderly band now drifts off along its own trajectory. The rings dissolve into a vast diffuse cloud spreading silently into the void. Closer to the Sun, Mercury and Venus, like Earth, are set adrift. Mercury, small and speedy, had been racing around the Sun every 88 days. Now it shoots straight outward from its last point in orbit, heading into the unknown. Venus, once locked in its slow, backward rotation, follows its own solitary path. The inner solar system, once so tightly bound, becomes a scattering of worlds with no shared centre. Farther out, Uranus and Neptune slip their leashes as well. Neptune's distant moon, Triton, which once orbited in the opposite direction to most moons in the solar system, finally breaks away entirely. The Kuiper Belt, home to countless icy objects beyond Neptune, dissolves into an expanding cloud. Bodies like Pluto and Eris, which once circled the Sun at the outer limits of its reach, now drift without any clear destination. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter faces a particularly dramatic fate. This vast collection of rocky bodies has always been held in check by the competing pulls of the Sun and Jupiter, their orbits kept stable over billions of years. Without gravity, that balance shatters instantly. The asteroids, from the largest like Ceres to countless small fragments, scatter in all directions. Some travel outward into deep space, while others cross the paths of planets that are themselves drifting away. The neat belt-like arrangement becomes a chaotic spray, like the shards of a shattered vase. Comets, too, lose their predictable routes. These icy travellers, which normally sweep in toward the sun and then arc back to the outer reaches, now travel in whatever direction they were moving when gravity vanished. Without the sun's heat to warm them, most remain dark, dormant ice balls, wandering endlessly through space. The solar system as a concept ceases to exist. What was once a unified structure is now a loose collection of worlds, each on its own lonely course. The careful clockwork of planetary motion, the reason calendars work, the reason seasons exist, the reason navigation across oceans was once possible, has broken apart in an instant. For billions of years, the planets had exerted small but significant influences on each other. Jupiter's mass shaped the orbits of countless asteroids. Saturn's pull subtly affected the paths of its neighbours, and the constant gravitational interplay between all the planets and the Sun maintained an overall harmony. Without that interplay, every body simply keeps moving in the direction and at the speed it had at the moment of gravity's disappearance. There are no curves now, no loops, no elegant ellipses, only straight lines drawn into the infinite black. If one could look at this from far above, the scene would be oddly beautiful. At first, the planets would seem to fly outward, like the spokes of a wheel breaking apart. Trails of dust and debris would glint faintly in the sun's dwindling light. Moons, rings, and smaller bodies would scatter like sparks from a dying fire. Over time, these lines of travel would stretch longer and longer until each world became just a faint point of light, impossible to distinguish from the background stars. The unravelling is silent, but profound. The solar system, which had been a coherent place, a home with a centre, is gone. What remains are solitary wanderers, each carrying its own history of storms, volcanoes, mountains, and oceans, now drifting into the great unknown without destination. And in that emptiness, the sun, once the heart of it all, shines alone, its light reaching fewer and fewer of the worlds it once warmed. The sun, for all its blazing confidence, has always lived a life of perfect balance. Deep in its core, nuclear fusion relentlessly turns hydrogen into helium, releasing unimaginable amounts of energy in the process. That energy pushes outward, trying to make the sun expand. At the same time, gravity, the sun's own immense mass pulling inward, tries to collapse it. These two forces are locked in a stalemate, a cosmic arm wrestle that has kept our star steady for over 4.5 billion years. But remove gravity, and that balance shatters instantly. The inward pull vanishes, leaving only the outward pressure from fusion. Without anything to contain it, the sun's plasma begins to surge outward. The dense, searing hot core is suddenly unconfined, and the energy that once had to fight against the sun's weight now rushes into open space. This isn't an explosion in the sense of a single violent bang. It's more like watching a balloon instantly lose all the tension in its skin. The layers of the sun begin to drift apart, expanding rapidly into the vacuum. Within minutes, its familiar sharp-edged disk would blur and swell. From Earth, instead of a blindingly bright, perfectly round star, you would see a vast glowing haze spreading across the sky. The temperature in the sun's core drops almost immediately, as the pressure that allowed fusion to occur disappears. Fusion itself slows and then halts, because the extreme heat and density required can no longer be sustained. The sun's light starts to fade, though its outer layers still glow for a long time as they disperse. In the vacuum of space, there is nothing to stop this expansion. No air resistance, no outer wall, just infinite room for the sun's former self to drift. The effect on the solar system is dramatic. Even though the planets were already set adrift the instant gravity failed, the sun is no longer the solid, steady point at the centre of everything. Instead, it becomes a swelling, shimmering cloud of plasma, stretching out in every direction. The once clear boundary between space and star disappears, replaced by a glowing fog that slowly thins over time. For any observer nearby, though nearby is relative when speaking in millions of kilometres, the spectacle would be otherworldly. Great streams of gas coloured in reds, oranges and faint pinks would ripple outward like the petals of a cosmic flower being pulled apart. Magnetic fields that once shaped solar flares and sunspots would twist and break, sending loops of plasma curling into space before fading into invisibility. The solar wind, normally a steady outflow of charged particles, would become an unrestrained torrent. These particles would no longer be guided by the sun's shape or its magnetic poles. They would stream outward chaotically, dispersing into the galaxy. Without the sun's compact gravitational hold, this material is not destined to ever be pulled back. It will continue its journey until it merges with the interstellar medium, the thin gas and dust that fill the spaces between stars. As the expanding plasma thins, the light from the sun changes. The intense white glare softens to a dimmer, redder glow. Shadows on Earth and the other planets become faint and diffuse, eventually disappearing entirely as the light comes from every direction instead of a single point. The familiar day-night cycle fades into a permanent faint twilight. Even this dimness will not last forever. As the plasma cloud spreads, it will cool and fade until it is invisible to human eyes. The disappearance of the sun as a star also changes the solar system's identity. Without a central, blazing body, there is no longer anything to define where the solar system begins or ends. The planets, now drifting independently, no longer orbit a shared home. The asteroid belt is gone, the Kuiper belt dispersed, the Oort cloud released into the galaxy. The sun's cloud of former self slowly merges with the background matter of the Milky Way. In a poetic sense, the sun has simply returned its material to the cosmos. The hydrogen and helium that made up most of its mass, along with the heavier elements formed during its lifetime, are released to drift between the stars. Over immense spans of time, that material may be swept up into new nebulae, perhaps one day becoming part of another star, or a planet, or even life itself. From Earth, however, the emotional impact is immediate. The sun has been our constant, not just as a source of heat and light, but as a point of reference in the sky, a universal clock that has ticked steadily since long before humans existed. To see it dissolve is to witness the unravelling of that constancy. The familiar precise circle that dominated our days is replaced by a fading memory in the form of a glowing mist. It would be a strangely quiet end. No deafening explosion, no shockwave tearing through space. Only the slow, graceful expansion of a star that no longer has the strength to hold itself together. Its light, once strong enough to cast shadows on worlds billions of kilometres away, dwindles into the background glow of the galaxy. The solar system, if it can still be called that, becomes just another set of wanderers in a universe where gravity's absence has erased the very idea of a centre. Stars are born from gravity's patience. In the quiet reaches of space, vast clouds of gas and dust drift for millions of years. Gravity, ever the subtle sculptor, draws the particles toward each other. As they gather, the cloud becomes denser, its centre heating up under the weight of the material pressing inward. Eventually, the pressure and temperature reach a point where nuclear fusion ignites, and a star is born. It's a process so gradual that it makes glaciers look hurried, yet it is responsible for every star that has ever shone in the universe. Take gravity away, and that process stops before it even begins. Gas and dust might still exist. In fact, they would be everywhere, but they would never clump together. The particles would just keep drifting apart, their paths never bending toward each other, even in the densest regions of the cosmos, where, under normal circumstances, gravity would be working to build the next generation of stars. The gas would simply spread thinner and thinner until it became indistinguishable from the background emptiness. This means no new stars will ever form again. The night sky you know now is filled with light from stars that were born millions or billions of years ago. But stars do not last forever. Each one is a kind of cosmic candle. burning through its fuel at a rate determined by its size. The most massive stars live brief, intense lives of only a few million years, while smaller stars like red dwarfs can burn for trillions. Still, without gravity, there will come a time when every single one runs out of fuel. The night sky would not go dark all at once. At first, it would look the same as always. The stars we see tonight are shining because they were formed long ago, and for a while, they would keep shining just as brightly. The change would be so slow that you wouldn't notice it from one night to the next, but over generations the difference would be undeniable. The brightest stars would vanish first, their short lives spent in a blaze of energy that can no longer be renewed. Galaxies too would start to lose their sparkle. Without the birth of new stars to replace the ones that die, the spiral arms of galaxies would begin to dim. The glowing bands of the Milky Way would grow patchy, the bright clusters fading into faint smudges. Even the great star-forming regions like the Orion Nebula would go dark, their clouds of gas and dust unable to collapse into new suns. Eventually, the night sky would become something very different from what we know. Instead of thousands of stars, there might be only a handful visible to the naked eye, each one a survivor burning through the last of its fuel. Those stars would be scattered randomly, not concentrated into the familiar patterns of constellations. Navigation by the stars, a practice older than civilization itself, would become impossible. The idea of looking up at the night sky to find your way would be as outdated as using smoke signals to send a message. Over unimaginably long timescales, even those last stars would wink out. The universe would be left with a scattering of cold, dark remnants, white dwarfs that have cooled to blackness, neutron stars no longer spinning with energy, and black holes, though even black holes would slowly evaporate through a process known as Hawking radiation. The darkness would be complete, broken only by the faint glow of ancient light still stretching across the cosmos from the days when stars were common. There's something quietly unsettling about imagining a sky without stars. They have been humanity's backdrop for as long as we have existed, silent companions through the entire story of life on Earth. They have inspired myths, guided explorers, and set the rhythms of calendars. To lose them would be to lose one of the oldest connections we have to the universe, and yet the loss would not be sudden. For a while, the stars would still shine as they always have, distant reminders of a time when gravity bound the universe together. In that way, the night sky would become a kind of archive, each point of light a relic from an era that can never return. You could look up and know that every star you see is living out the end of its story, with no new chapters to follow. In the far future, the cosmos without gravity would be a silent, diffuse place. No stars, no galaxies, no bursts of light from distant supernova. Only isolated atoms and the dim echoes of what once was. The sky, once a dazzling map of countless worlds, would be a deep, unbroken black, a reminder that even the grandest patterns in nature depend on a force we so often take for granted. Black holes are, in many ways, gravity taken to its most extreme conclusion. They are regions of space where the pull of gravity is so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape. The boundary that marks this point of no return is called the event horizon. Cross it, and you are forever trapped. Outside of it, the rest of the universe carries on, blissfully unaware of what lies within. The reason black holes exist at all comes down to space-time itself. According to Einstein's general theory of relativity, mass bends space-time, and the more mass you cram into a small space, the more severe the bending becomes. A black hole is formed when matter collapses into such a tiny volume that space-time curves inward completely, sealing off a region from the rest of reality. From the outside, this manifests as the event horizon, not a physical surface, but a boundary in the geometry of space-time. Now imagine removing gravity from the universe. The very thing that warps space-time and creates the event horizon would vanish in an instant. Black holes would lose their defining feature immediately, because without gravity there is no space-time curvature to hold them together. What was once the most inescapable trap in the cosmos would simply not be a trap at all. The matter inside, previously crushed into a singularity, an unimaginably dense point, would no longer be confined. Freed from the crushing pull, it would expand outward at incredible speed. But there's a catch. The material in a black hole is not just any ordinary matter. Under normal circumstances, the conditions inside are so extreme that atoms themselves are torn apart, leaving a soup of fundamental particles. With gravity gone, this exotic matter would spill into space, rapidly cooling and dispersing. From a distance, the disappearance of a black hole would be almost undetectable. Black holes are famously dark, so there would be no flash of light announcing their end. Instead, their presence would simply stop influencing the motion of nearby stars and gas clouds. The gravitational dance they once orchestrated would end abruptly, leaving the surrounding region oddly still. Some black holes are at the hearts of galaxies, holding entire stellar neighborhoods in place. Without their immense gravitational anchor, these central regions would unravel. The tightly packed orbits of stars near the galactic core would dissolve, sending the stars drifting outward. The supermassive black holes themselves, some with masses millions or even billions of times greater than the Sun, would dissolve just as completely as their smaller cousins. Even more strangely, the light that was trapped just outside an event horizon, photons caught in what's called the photon sphere, would be released. In the blink of an eye, ancient light that has been circling the edge of a black hole for millennia would stream freely into space. It wouldn't be enough to dazzle the sky, but somewhere, at some moment, a telescope might register a faint, unexpected flash from the heart of a galaxy. There's also the question of what happens to the information about everything that ever fell into a black hole. In physics, there's a long-standing debate about whether this information is destroyed or somehow preserved. Without gravity, the problem changes entirely. The matter is simply released, and with it, perhaps, the imprints of its history. Somewhere in the drifting chaos of particles might be the scrambled remains of stars, planets, and even light itself, all jumbled together in a way that makes them unrecognizable. The disappearance of black holes would remove some of the most enigmatic objects from the universe, but it would also erase the extremes they represent. No more singularities, no more infinite densities, no more boundaries from which nothing can return. In a way, it would make the universe gentler, but also far less mysterious. And yet, without gravity, the absence of black holes would hardly be the most pressing change. They would fade from existence quietly, without fanfare, leaving behind only an expanding cloud of once-trapped matter. The universe, already adrift and unravelling, would simply become a little less strange. A galaxy is not a single object, but a vast community bound together by gravity's quiet persistence. Every star, every planet, every drifting cloud of gas is engaged in a slow, endless orbit around the galaxy's centre. The arms of a spiral galaxy, those sweeping, graceful curves, are not fixed structures, but patterns formed by countless stars and nebulae moving together, held in place by the combined pull of their shared mass. Without gravity, that unity would unravel instantly. The moment the binding force disappears, every star, gas cloud, and speck of dust in a galaxy continues along its own straight-line path, no longer curving inward toward the galactic centre. The arms would not tear apart in an explosion, but rather loosen like ribbons unspooling in slow motion. The grand spiral patterns would fade, the tight elliptical shapes would stretch and fray, and the once cohesive whirl of starlight would become a scattered spray across the blackness. Stars near the centre would drift outward, leaving behind the crowded hubs of activity that once hosted dense clusters and supermassive black holes. Without those gravitational anchors, the heart of a galaxy would dissolve into emptiness. The dense central bulge, which often appears as a glowing sphere of countless stars, would thin until it was indistinguishable from the rest of the universe. From afar, the transformation would be strangely beautiful at first. Galaxies that once shone with concentrated light would become soft, fading clouds of starlight, their outlines blurring into nothing. The sharp edges of spiral arms would lose definition, dissolving into a random scattering of points. In a universe without gravity, the very concept of a galaxy, a bound collection of stars, would simply cease to exist. The effects would not be limited to the large-scale shapes we see through telescopes. Galaxy clusters, which are gatherings of hundreds or even thousands of galaxies bound together, would fall apart just as easily. These clusters are some of the largest structures in the cosmos, with gravity stretching across millions of light years to keep them intact. Remove that force, and the galaxies inside would drift in all directions, never to return. Even the cosmic web, the immense network of filaments connecting clusters across the universe, would unravel. Over time, what was once a patterned structure shaped by billions of years of gravitational attraction would flatten into a formless scattering. The universe would lose its texture, becoming an almost featureless expanse. There is a deep poetry in this loss. Galaxies not just beautiful to look at, they are the great homes of stars, cradles of planetary systems, and engines of cosmic chemistry. Their shapes are the result of eons of interaction, mergers, collisions, and tidal pulls that stir and sculpt their forms. Without gravity, those long stories are cut short, and the relationships between stars and galaxies end forever. It is easy to think of this change in terms of disappearance, the absence of the Milky Way's bright arc in our night sky, the loss of the Andromeda galaxy's faint glow. But there's another perspective. In a weightless universe, every star is suddenly alone, moving without ever again bending toward another. They pass each other without interaction, separated by such vast distances that they may as well be in different universes entirely. The loneliness of such a cosmos is difficult to imagine, even now when the space between galaxies is almost unfathomably empty. They are still connected, moving toward or around each other, destined to meet and merge over the course of billions of years. Without gravity, that sense of an unfolding cosmic story vanishes. There is no future collision between the Milky Way and Andromeda, no dance of merging stars, no tidal streams tracing graceful arcs across the dark. And yet, there is something serene in this vision. A galaxy dissolving into the void is not violent or chaotic, it is peaceful. Each star simply continues on its way, carrying its light into an ever emptier universe. The arms unwind, the clusters fade, and what remains is a quiet scattering of luminous points, each one following its own solitary path. If you could watch from an impossible vantage point outside time, you would see the grand designs of the universe slowly dissolve like chalk drawings in the rain. The shapes that once told the story of gravity's work would soften, fade, and finally vanish. What was once intricate and connected would become sparse and silent, each star a solitary traveller in an infinite night. In the end, the universe would be left without its grand cities of light. The galaxies, once the most dazzling structures in the cosmos, would be gone, not in an instant, but in a slow, graceful drift toward nothingness. What remains is an open, unbounded darkness, a stage without scenery, where the actors have long since left, and the curtain will never fall. If you were to ask what really holds the universe together, the simple answer would be gravity. But the truth, as Einstein revealed over a century ago, is far stranger and far more elegant. Gravity is not an invisible force pulling things toward each other in the way Newton imagined. Instead, it is the shape of reality itself. Einstein's general theory of relativity tells us that space and time are not a static, rigid stage upon which events happen. They are flexible, dynamic, and intimately connected. Together they form what we call space-time, a four-dimensional fabric that can bend, stretch, and ripple. When mass and energy are present, space-time curves, and that curvature tells objects how to move. A planet orbiting a star is not being pulled in by some mysterious tether. It is simply following the straightest possible path through a curved geometry. In physics, this path is called a geodesic, and it is the equivalent of a straight line in a curved space. If you could remove the curvature entirely, the planet would no longer circle the star. It would move off in a straight line, just as it would if you stopped spinning a ball on the end of a string. The beauty of this picture is that it explains not just why planets orbit, but why anything in the universe has structure at all. Every galaxy, star, planet and moon exists because space-time is curved in just the right way to draw matter together. Even you are held to Earth by this same curvature. Your body is following the path defined by the shape of space-time near our planet's surface. Without curvature, nothing stays connected. Stars would not form because the clouds of gas and dust from which they are born would never collapse inward. Planets could not assemble because the tiny grains in a protoplanetary disk would simply drift apart. Even galaxies, which require the combined gravitational pull of billions of stars to hold them together, would never take shape. The universe would be a diffuse haze of particles, each minding its own business, never gathering into anything larger. One way to picture curved space-time is to imagine a trampoline with a heavy ball placed in the centre. The fabric dips under the weight, and smaller objects placed nearby roll toward it. In reality, space-time's curvature works in 4 dimensions, not 2, but the analogy captures the essence. Mass changes the geometry, and geometry guides motion. Take away the dip, and the smaller objects no longer roll inward. This means that gravity, as we experience it, is not something acting on us at all. It is simply the natural consequence of living in a curved reality. You're not being pulled down to the ground. You're following the straightest possible path through a space-time that happens to slope toward the centre of Earth. Your feet meet the floor not because you're being yanked downward, but because the floor is in your way, preventing you from continuing along that path. The universe as we know it is, in this sense, a grand sculpture carved out of the shape of space-time. Remove the curvature, and the sculpture collapses into a formless cloud. There would be no orbits, no tides, no galaxies, and no clusters. Light itself would travel through a perfectly flat universe, never bending around stars or being lensed by massive objects. The strange beauty of gravitational lensing, where distant galaxies are magnified and distorted by the mass of other galaxies in front of them, would be gone forever. Even time is tied to gravity in ways we rarely think about. The stronger the curvature, the more time itself slows down. This is not an illusion. It has been measured on mountains, skyscrapers, and even in airplanes. Remove curvature, and time would tick at the same pace everywhere. That might sound neat and tidy, but it would strip away one of the subtle textures of reality. The glue that holds the universe together is therefore not some mystical force acting from afar. It is the geometry of reality itself, shaped by the presence of energy and matter. Without that geometry, without the gentle warps and folds of space-time, the universe becomes unbound. Every particle would move on its own, forever isolated, and the grand cosmic web would dissolve into an endless, structureless void. It is a strange truth that the vast beauty of the universe, from the swirl of a hurricane to the orbit of a moon to the sweep of a spiral galaxy, is all just the shadow of curved space-time. Remove the curvature, and all that remains is a flat, empty stage, with no actors and no story to tell. In the very beginning, the universe was not a place of galaxies, stars, or planets. It was a hot, dense, rapidly expanding soup of energy and subatomic particles, fresh from the Big Bang. In those first fractions of a second, there was no structure to speak of, just a chaotic haze where matter and radiation were inseparable. If you could have drifted through that newborn cosmos, you would have found no familiar shapes or boundaries, only a uniform glow stretching in every direction. Gravity was already there, though, woven into space-time itself. Even then it was waiting to start its patient work. The Big Bang flung matter apart, but tiny imperfections in its otherwise smooth spread minuscule differences in density gave gravity something to work with. These small variations, some no larger than a part in 100,000, became the seeds of everything that would follow. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the universe cooled enough for atoms to form. Photons were freed from constant collisions with charged particles, creating the cosmic microwave background, a faint afterglow we can still detect today. But in this new, transparent universe, gravity finally began to take centre stage. Matter started to drift toward those slightly denser regions, where its own pull would attract more and more material. The first structures were vast clouds of hydrogen and helium stretching across light years. Left to themselves, they would have remained diffuse forever. But gravity coaxed them inward, compressing them until their centres grew hot enough to ignite nuclear fusion. This was the birth of the first stars, enormous short-lived giants that burned furiously and ended their lives in spectacular supernovae. Those explosions scattered heavier elements, the building blocks of planets, moons, and eventually life. Gravity did not stop at stars. It gathered them into galaxies, sprawling collections of hundreds of billions of suns, swirling together in elegant patterns. The pull between galaxies created even larger structures, clusters and superclusters, interconnected by vast filaments that formed the skeleton of the cosmic web. Without gravity, the universe would have remained a thin mist, without form or connection. Inside galaxies, gravity worked on a smaller scale, shaping the dusty disks around newborn stars into planets and moons. These protoplanetary disks were busy, chaotic places. Pebbles stuck together to form boulders. Boulders collided to form rocky worlds, and gravity stitched it all into stable orbits. In our own solar system, this process gave rise to rocky inner planets, gas giants with rings and moons, and countless smaller objects drifting in the asteroid belt and beyond. It is tempting to see gravity as just a background force, a quiet constant, but it is more like an architect. It decides where matter goes, how it gathers, and what shapes it will take. It is responsible for the dance of moons around planets, the looping paths of comets, and the way our Earth spins steadily on its axis. On our own planet, gravity's role in the emergence of life was both direct and subtle. It kept our atmosphere close, allowing liquid water to remain on the surface. It drove the tides through the moon's pull, creating coastal environments where life could adapt and diversify. It even influenced the shape of living things, guiding how plants grow, how blood flows, and how animals balance. Without gravity, Earth might have been an airless rock, stripped of oceans and unable to nurture life. From the Big Bang to the present day, gravity has been the invisible hand shaping the cosmos. It turned the initial chaos into a structured universe, gathered atoms into stars, stars into galaxies, and galaxies into sprawling clusters. It built worlds where chemistry could experiment for billions of years, eventually leading to life capable of pondering the very force that made it possible. If gravity were to vanish now, all of that structure would slowly unravel, returning the universe to a kind of formlessness. But as long as it endures, it will continue its quiet work, not rushing, not hesitating, but patiently pulling the cosmos into new shapes over timescales far beyond human comprehension. It is the oldest organizer, the most patient builder, and perhaps the greatest artist the universe has ever known. Gravity is not the same everywhere, and a quick journey through our solar system makes that clear. Earth's gravity might feel like the natural default, but it's only one example in a wide spectrum. On the Moon, gravity is about 1/6 of what we are used to, which is why Apollo astronauts could bound in slow-motion leaps with surprising ease. Mars, with about 1/3 of Earth's gravity, would make you feel feather-light, though not quite enough for Olympic high jumps into orbit. Jupiter, on the other hand, would pull you down with more than twice the strength we know. assuming you could even stand on its swirling gaseous surface without being crushed by its atmosphere. Imagine visiting these worlds, not as a tourist with sturdy boots, but as a living thing evolved there. On the Moon, for example, a native creature might grow tall and spindly, its delicate frame supported with ease. Muscles could be thin, bones lighter, and every movement would feel effortless. On Mars, creatures might still be long-limbed but a bit sturdier, built for bounding over the dusty plains without tiring quickly. Jupiter's gravity, if it had a solid surface, would demand a completely different design. Low to the ground with powerful dense muscles and bones like reinforced pillars just to move around. Now, take away gravity on these worlds altogether. A moon creature accustomed to graceful, easy motion would find itself drifting away with every push of a limb. Without the moon's gentle pull, its already light bones might not serve much purpose, and muscles would atrophy even faster than in low gravity. On Mars, without its modest pull, dust and sand would float upward in shimmering clouds, and any native life would have to find entirely new ways to stay in place, perhaps clinging to the ground like geckos or developing natural anchor lines. On Jupiter, the change would be almost incomprehensible. Creatures that had spent their lives battling crushing gravity would suddenly find themselves weightless. Every movement would send them spinning in ways they had never experienced. The dense, heavy bodies designed for an immense pull might become a hindrance, drifting like leaden balloons in the upper atmosphere. Without gravity to keep the planet's gases compacted, the thick atmosphere itself would begin to swell and disperse into space, taking its inhabitants with it. Elsewhere, the extremes are even wilder. Tiny asteroids barely have any gravity to begin with. Walk too fast, and you could launch yourself into space without much effort. In a no-gravity scenario, these worlds would lose even the faint hold they have on their rocks and dust, dissolving into loose swarms of particles. If anything lived there, it would need to adapt instantly to a life of drifting among debris, finding new ways to navigate in the void. Even on worlds far from the Sun, like Neptune or Pluto, the sudden absence of gravity would be transformative. On Pluto, with gravity at only about 6% of Earth's, creatures could already make enormous leaps, but without any pull at all, those leaps would never end. Neptune's thick, icy atmosphere would thin and vanish, scattering its weather systems and leaving behind only the frozen remnants. The variety of gravitational strengths across the solar system shapes everything, from the landscapes and atmospheres to the imagined creatures that might live there. Remove gravity from any of these worlds, and it would not just be a small adjustment. It would erase the physical rules those places have always followed. Life, if it survived at all, would have to invent entirely new strategies just to stay in one place. Gravity gives each world its personality. It decides how tall mountains can be, how high waves can rise, how thick an atmosphere can remain, and how bodies, living or not, are built. Without it, every planet and moon would lose not just its pull, but its defining character. The solar system would no longer be a collection of distinct worlds, but a drifting assortment of matter, slowly scattering into the dark. With gravity gone, nothing would ever slow down, turn, or curve, unless something else got in the way. Motion would be pure, untouched by pull or push, beyond the one that set it going in the first place. This is the quiet dominion of inertia, the rule that an object in motion stays in motion, an object at rest stays at rest, unless something interferes. On Earth, we rarely see inertia in its perfect form. Air resistance, friction, and gravity all conspire to stop things eventually. Without gravity, those familiar brakes would disappear, and motion would go on forever. Imagine a ball once tossed across a field. In our ordinary world, it arcs gently, pulled down by gravity until it bounces to a stop. In a world without gravity, that same throw would send it on a journey without end. It would sail through the air, never falling, never slowing, gliding in the same direction until it left the planet entirely. Even a light push would be enough to set something drifting away, each movement locked into eternity. The air itself would soon thin as it escaped into space, so there would be no wind to nudge objects, no gusts to alter a path. A single leaf released from a tree would float upward and outward, each slow turn frozen into an endless tumble. The soft spirals of snowflakes would stretch into infinite ribbons, drifting into the black. In space, inertia is already the norm. Spacecraft coast between planets without firing engines for most of their journey. Without gravity, every object would behave that way. A coin spun into the air would keep spinning forever, its face flashing in the light like a tiny beacon. A drifting teacup would rotate slowly, keeping its same pace century after century. This frozen momentum would not be violent or chaotic, but strangely serene. Without gravitational attraction to draw paths into curves, all motion would become straight lines. Planets would slide away from their stars, stars from their galaxies, and galaxies from each other. What once was a cosmic dance, intricate, looping and interwoven, would dissolve into countless solitary journeys, each one a straight, unbroken path through the dark. Over time, the universe would begin to look sparse, not because matter had disappeared, but because everything was constantly leaving everything else. The grand spirals of galaxies would slowly unwind, stars drifting apart like beads from a broken necklace. Nebulae, once dense clouds shaped by gravity into graceful arches, would loosen into fine mist, spreading across unimaginable distances. The human mind likes to imagine motion as purposeful, a journey from here to there, a trajectory with an end. But without gravity there would be no destinations, only departures. A stone set free in space would glide without pause, passing distant stars without even noticing them, never changing course unless struck. This kind of eternity is not one of stillness, but of perfect, unaltered travel. Even light would be unaffected by curves in space-time because space-time itself would be flat. In our universe now, massive objects bend light's path, creating phenomena like gravitational lensing, the gentle bending of starlight around galaxies. Without gravity, that bending would vanish, and light would travel in unwavering lines, revealing a universe stripped of its subtle warps and distortions. It is strange to think of a universe without collisions. Today, asteroids hit planets, stars consume drifting gas, and galaxies merge. These encounters happen because gravity gathers paths together. Without it, nothing would meet by chance unless they began already touching. A grain of dust released into space would never join another. It would simply continue on, a lone traveller, until the end of time. There is a quiet beauty in this vision, a stillness hidden within the endless movement. No rush, no struggle, no tug of war between pull and resistance, just motion, as clean and permanent as a line drawn through the dark. Every push would be final, every turn irreversible, every release eternal. Without gravity, the universe would not fall apart violently, but drift apart softly. It would become a place where everything remembers only its last motion and nothing more, where every step, throw and gesture is written into space itself, continuing long after the hand that made it is gone. It would be a universe frozen not in stillness, but in perfect, unchanging motion. If you want to know what life without gravity is like, you do not need to imagine it entirely. We already have living examples. Astronauts have been floating around in microgravity for decades, giving us a glimpse of how the human body responds when it is no longer constantly pulled toward the ground. On Earth, gravity is the ever-present trainer in your personal gym. Even sitting still, your muscles and bones are working just enough to keep you upright. Every step, every time you lift your mug of tea, every moment you resist toppling over, all of it is exercise you do without thinking. In space, that constant background workout disappears. Without the need to support your own weight, muscles begin to weaken. Astronauts have to use specialized exercise machines to keep their strength, running while strapped to treadmills with bungee cords or lifting weights that work through resistance bands instead of mass. Even with strict daily routines, they can still lose noticeable muscle mass over the course of a mission. Bones suffer, too. Gravity normally tells your body, hey, we need strong legs and hips to keep you upright. Without that demand, bones lose density, a condition similar to osteoporosis. In orbit, astronauts can lose around 1% of bone mass per month in the weight-bearing parts of the body, like the spine, pelvis, and legs. Back on Earth, they have to spend months regaining that strength. The difference is, in space they float effortlessly. Here, the first few days back, they feel heavy, clumsy, and sore, as if they have aged years in just a few months. There are subtler effects as well. On Earth, gravity helps keep fluids, blood, water, lymph, flowing smoothly, generally pooling a little more toward your legs. Without it, fluids drift upward toward the head. Astronauts often experience a puffy face, pressure in the skull, and nasal congestion. The shift can even affect vision, with some returning home needing glasses for the first time in their lives. This condition, known as spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, is still being studied, but it is a clear reminder that gravity shapes us in ways we barely notice. Even the heart changes in weightlessness. Here on Earth, it works a little harder to push blood upward against gravity. In space, the heart becomes more spherical and slightly smaller, pumping blood without that uphill challenge. Over time, this can make the cardiovascular system less efficient. When astronauts come home, their bodies have to relearn how to keep blood pressure stable when standing up, which is why some faint after returning. All of this comes from a version of weightlessness, where there is still some gravity. After all, astronauts on the International Space Station are still being pulled toward Earth. They're just in continuous free fall. If gravity truly stopped everywhere, these effects would apply to all of us all the time. The entire human race would start to adapt, or more accurately to weaken, in ways similar to long-term space travelers. The difference is we would not have the option to come home to a healthy pull of 1G. Children born in such a world would grow up without ever feeling weight. Their bones might form more lightly, their muscles developing differently, their sense of balance and orientation entirely redefined. Jumping, falling, running. These would be alien concepts. Movement would be pushing and pulling in the air, a kind of three-dimensional swimming. Our anatomy, honed for a planet with a constant downward tug, would slowly drift towards something else entirely. Yet gravity's invisible work is not just about muscles and bones. It also keeps our organs in place, shapes how our blood flows, and even plays a role in digestion. Without it, the stomach and intestines would work differently, fluids moving less predictably, food and drink not settling as they do now. Our inner ears, which help us sense balance and orientation, would send constant signals of floating, forcing the brain to adjust to a whole new definition of up and down, or perhaps abandon the concept entirely. In short, gravity is a silent architect of our biology. It has shaped our skeletons, our muscles, our hearts, and even our brains. It has done so quietly for so long that we only truly appreciate it when it is gone. And while weightlessness might sound like fun, and in short bursts it is, living without gravity's steady, guiding pull would change us in ways we're only just beginning to understand. If it were to vanish forever, we would not just be learning to live without falling. We would be learning to live without one of the most fundamental forces that made us who we are. Gravity feels so reliable that the idea of it simply stopping sounds like the setup for a science fiction novel. We never wake up wondering if, just for today, things might stop falling. That quiet consistency is one of the most reassuring things about living in a universe with well-behaved physics. But could it, even in theory, just switch off? According to what we currently know, the answer is a firm, almost certainly not. gravity is not a machine that can be unplugged or a setting that can be dialed down. In the framework of general relativity, gravity is not really a force in the traditional sense at all. It is the curvature of space-time caused by mass and energy. As long as mass and energy exist, space-time will curve, and objects will follow those curves. For gravity to vanish completely, either the mass-energy content of the universe would have to disappear, or the very geometry of space-time would need to behave differently. Neither of those options is something nature casually does. Physicists talk about fundamental constants, numbers baked into the laws of the universe, like the speed of light or the gravitational constant g. If any of these were to change significantly, the physics we take for granted would be rewritten. A sudden drop of g to 0 would mean no gravitational attraction between masses at all. But our best measurements show that these constants have stayed, well, constant for billions of years. They are so steady that we use them as the foundation for defining other units in science. That said, it is not unthinkable in theoretical physics to imagine universes with different constants, or ones where those constants shift over unimaginable spans of time. Some cosmological models suggest that in the deep future, the laws of physics could drift slightly, not in a way we could observe over human lifetimes, but on timescales approaching the age of the universe itself. Even then, any change would likely be slow, not an instant switch off. There are also exotic theories where gravity could weaken or vanish locally. In some ideas from high-energy physics, gravity might leak into extra dimensions, becoming weaker in our own universe. Others suggest that if space-time itself underwent a dramatic phase transition, the way water turns to ice, the nature of all forces, including gravity, could change. But these are speculative frontiers, far from being anything like predictions we expect to see. If gravity did stop, even just for a moment, it would mean that something truly profound had happened to the fabric of reality. This is not the kind of event that could be caused by an astronomical accident, like a passing black hole or a burst of energy from a distant galaxy. It would point to a complete rewrite of the rules, the sort of cosmic event that would be fascinating for theoretical physicists, but extremely bad news for, well, everything else. In the end, our confidence in gravity's stability comes from the fact that it is tied so deeply to the structure of the universe. To imagine it gone is to imagine a universe entirely unlike our own, one where there are no stars, no planets, and no reason for matter to gather together at all. Gravity is not just a feature of the world, it is one of the threads in the fabric of existence. Pull it out, and the whole cosmic tapestry unravels. So while it is fun, and occasionally alarming, to explore what might happen if gravity just stopped, reality offers us some comfort. This is one bedtime worry you can safely leave behind. If anything is going to keep you awake at night, it probably will not be the sudden disappearance of space-time curvature, and if it somehow does happen, you will have far bigger problems than trying to get to sleep. It is easy to overlook gravity precisely because it is always there. Day after day, year after year, it never demands our attention. It does not need maintenance, it never sends you an alarming notification, and it does not have a habit of changing its mind. You can drop a ball in ancient Mesopotamia, Renaissance Florence, or a modern city street, and it will fall in exactly the same way. In a world where so many things are unpredictable, that kind of steadfastness is quietly reassuring. Gravity is the reason you can place a mug on your desk without worrying it will wander off. It keeps your body anchored to the planet, your lungs breathing air that stays close, and your feet making reliable contact with the ground. It gives the oceans their rhythm, keeps the moon in view, and guides Earth along a path that has brought life, the seasons, climate, and stability it needs to flourish. It is so woven into the background of existence that you could live your whole life without ever truly noticing how much you depend on it. There is something comforting in the idea that no matter how chaotic the day feels, you can still count on an apple to fall from a branch rather than float away. It is not romantic in the traditional sense, but perhaps gravity is the most reliable long-term relationship humanity has ever had. It has been with us since the very first atoms clumped together in the newborn universe, and it will still be there when the stars we see today have burned out. That kind of loyalty is rare on a cosmic scale. If gravity were unreliable, life would be in constant upheaval. The smallest variation in its pull would ripple through everything we know, altering the length of days, shifting climates, unsettling the delicate orbits of worlds. Even if it never fully stopped, a fluctuating gravitational field would make the universe a far more precarious place. Stability in this case is not dull. It is the very reason anything complex can exist at all. Reflecting on what the absence of gravity would mean reminds us just how precious its presence is. Without it, there would be no mountains or rivers, no stars or planets, and certainly no us. All the beauty we take for granted, the quiet arc of the moon rising, the curve of waves meeting the shore, the way a leaf spirals gently to the ground, owes itself to this invisible, unceasing pull. In a way, appreciating gravity is like appreciating breathing. You do not think about it constantly, but the moment you imagine it gone, you realize how essential it is. And unlike so many things we value, gravity's presence is not fragile. It is built into the nature of reality itself. It will not fade with age, forget its responsibilities, or get distracted. It is simply there, shaping the universe with quiet persistence. So tonight, as you lie in bed, you can be grateful for this silent companion that keeps the world grounded in every sense of the word. Gravity is not flashy, it is not dramatic, but it is dependable beyond measure. And in an unpredictable universe, that might just be the most remarkable thing of all. And here we are again, back in your own familiar corner of the universe. The thought experiment fades, the drifting oceans and wandering planets settling into the comfortable knowledge that, in reality, gravity is still very much here. The air still presses softly against your skin. The ground is still exactly where you left it. Your chair hasn't floated away in your absence. It is almost poetic how the most extraordinary force can be so unassuming. Gravity does not announce itself. It does not ask for applause. It simply holds everything in place so life can happen, quietly, invisibly, and unfailingly. That steadiness is why you can walk through a park without worrying the trees might drift off, or why you can pour tea into a cup without it forming a little floating sphere in the middle of your kitchen. And in those ordinary moments, watching a raindrop race down a window, tossing an apple in your hand, or skipping a stone across a still lake, you're really watching the handiwork of one of the most fundamental forces in nature. The same pull that guides galaxies also makes the arc of a ball feel satisfying to your eyes. The same space-time curvature that keeps the moon in our sky is the reason your feet rest so naturally against the floor. Perhaps the beauty of gravity is that it doesn't need to be grand to be wonderful. It is there in the weight of a blanket on a cold night, in the way steam curls from a cup and then drifts gently down, in the lazy sway of a hammock in a summer breeze. It gives shape to every step, every drop, every small act of balance we make without thinking. So as this journey winds down, imagine yourself holding that warm drink, maybe tea, maybe coffee, feeling its weight in your hands. Your feet rest firmly on the ground, a simple contact that means you are connected to an entire planet. Outside, the Earth continues its steady spin beneath the stars, oceans and mountains and cities all moving together in a grand, unbroken dance. In this vast and restless universe, gravity is your constant companion, keeping you grounded in more ways than one, and for tonight, that's all you need to know.